My ideas actually crystallized when I started reading Sri Aurobindo, when I read The Foundations of Indian Culture. That completely shifted the way in which I thought about the revival and Renaissance in India. But I will also tell you that I was very surprised at that point in time when I read the first chapter of that book. Is India civilized? And I began to think, what sort of question is this? We have never talked about this. We have always thought that we have been civilized, we are civilized, and we will become even more civilized. But why is Sri Aurobindo stating this question at the very beginning? Of course, I was not familiar with what the West has written on India. And the West has written voluminously on India, particularly during the colonial period, when it was described savage and uncivilized from as many vantage points as possible. Of course, Sri Aurobindo refers to the works of William Archer in that particular book. I was even more surprised when I read History of British India by James Mill. This is a 3-volume work which was published in 1817. After 9 years of his association with the East India Company. East India Company had hired him for that particular work. Interestingly, James Mill wrote History of India without visiting India. And in that particular book, there is one section of the Hindus. There are 7 chapters in that particular book. And in those 7 chapters, he has taken every measure to show that India is savage and uncivilized. Now, of course, this book was written in 1817. Sri Aurobindo wrote a response on a topic like this in 1917 or so. Why are we talking about this today? The reason why we are talking about this today is that this narrative is still operational, and I'm not exaggerating this when I'm saying this to you. Below mentioned that I've written this work titled Making Children Hindu-Phobic. This is a critical analysis of the topics covered on India and Hinduism for grade 6 by a publisher, McGraw-Hill. When you will go through the description, what you will find that it is just a politically correct version of the politically incorrect things that were written on India and Hinduism during the colonial period. So the only shift that has happened is that this narrative has become politically correct. But the core of that description hasn't shifted. It still remains the same. Still, Hinduism and India is seen through the prism of caste. And when we talk about caste, oppression and hierarchy follow. They are natural corollary or consequence of that description. So what happens? India and the traditions of India are hierarchical and oppressive. And this is the narrative which is unfolded, and this is put into the minds of the children grade 6 onwards. And as they grow older, they are only fed the sophisticated version of this narrative. So what I mean to say is that what begins at grade school, it continues through college and graduate studies. This is the reality. Again, I am not exaggerating. I am coming to this from a very scientific perspective after having done the work, after having read a lot of literature, and understanding that this malaise that Sri Aurobindo has spoken about, that hasn't really disappeared. It continues. And my understanding is that as long as this malaise will continue, the renaissance of India will not happen. Or the renaissance or revival of India will get massively impeded. In order for that renaissance to happen, it is important that people are taught what India really has been and what are the possibilities that India can unfold for itself and for humanity in the future. This is what Sri Aurobindo's focus has been. The conflation of thought and the participation of a civilization and comity of nations are entwined. If you will look into history, you will find that good, wonderful universities have preceded the rise of civilizations. Look at what happened in Europe, 11th, 12th century onwards. There was scholastic movement. Different universities in all the imperial nations were established. These universities went from strength to strength for about 350, 400 years. And these civilizations, in whatever way, we may not agree with their ways, but they expanded themselves, they unfolded themselves. Similar is the case with the United States of America. Harvard was founded in 1600s. Many of the Ivy League institutions were founded in 1700s. In a span of about 350 years, you see the United States becoming a world power. Conversely, when you look at Indian history, most of the universities in India, they were destroyed at the close of the 12th century CE. And the impact has been that India is still reeling under the impact of colonization. It hasn't relieved itself. It hasn't manifested its full potential. Now, of course, as practitioners of this yoga, we know that mind is not a good instrument for truth. In fact, it is a bad instrument of truth. Sri Aurobindo and the mother have talked about this on many different occasions. The ultimate truths of existence cannot be found through mind. On the contrary, it can only be found after transcending the mind, after going beyond the mind and finding unity and union with the divine. But we must remember that this yoga is a world participating yoga. And because it is a world participating yoga, we need our mind to manifest the truth that we have experienced after going beyond the mind. Mind becomes extremely important from that perspective. From that perspective, it also becomes important that we nurture the mind, we nurture thought. And this is the power of the thought that we have to unleash on this civilization in a powerful way, but in a way that it uplifts the consciousness of the people, uplifts the consciousness of the students. I spoke to you about my experiences in academia in the United States in terms of the representation on Hinduism and India. The situation in India is not very different either. How many universities do really talk about India from an emic perspective, from an insider's perspective? Practically none. Why? because we don't have an understanding of the cosmology which is behind this culture, behind this civilization. We don't have on a massive scale an understanding of the nuts and bolts on which this civilization has been built. If we don't understand the very fundamentals of the civilization, I do not think that we can really explain the civilization and its ethos from within. That is what is the requirement at this point in time. And any words by any disciple of Mother and Sri Aurobindo will ever match the 4 chapters that Sri Aurobindo has written on Renaissance in India. I would say that people who are really interested in this topic would want to read this over and over again. And what I have done for us today is that I have just brought a slice from this book. In my understanding, and I think all of you will agree with this, that the Renaissance of India should revolve around these thoughts, these ideas. The recovery of the old spiritual knowledge and experience in all its splendor, depth and fullness is its first and most essential work. I'll repeat. The recovery of the old spiritual knowledge and experience in all its splendor, depth and fullness is its first, most essential work. The flowing of this spirituality into new forms of philosophy, literature, art, science, and critical knowledge is the second. An original dealing with modern problems in the light of the Indian spirit and the endeavor to formulate a greater synthesis of a spiritualized society is the third and most difficult. Its success on these 3 lines will be the measure of its help to the future of humanity. Recovery of old spiritual knowledge. That Sri Aurobindo says is first and foremost, along with the experience. So what is he basically saying to us? He's saying, be good sadhaks, experience the yogic world, and at the same time, intellectually recover what has been lost, what has been suppressed. And what I would say now at this point in time may not be politically correct, but it is true when you look into history straight in the eye, that this civilization has been brutalized for over 1,000 years. At one point in time, the universities were destroyed. They were ransacked. How can I say this with confidence? I read the travelogues of Xuanzang. Xuanzang visited India between 680 CE and 700 CE. He talks about the existence of numerous sangharamas, basically seminaries, monasteries which had colleges attached to them. I'm not talking about Nalanda University and other universities. I'm talking about the existence of numerous colleges. Along with the destruction of those colleges, of course the texts also were destroyed. And then when you come to the British colonial period, you realize that the Gurukula system, which was massively in existence, was brutally destroyed as well. And for that, you need to read the works of Dharampal. And Dharampal has basically based his works on the writings of the Britishers who were serving in India. What he says is that in southern India, there were at least 5 colleges in every district. And there was at least 1 school in every village. And here is the most surprising part. The teachers in these schools and colleges were not Brahmins, and the students were from all sections of the society, including women. These are facts that can be verified. So what I'm saying is that when we talk about the recovery of this knowledge system, it is also important to understand what has happened in history. It is very commonly stated that if we don't learn from history, history repeats itself. I'm not saying that when we learn about ourselves from this aspect of history, that we become vengeful towards others. That's not the idea. The idea is to educate and illumine ourselves, to understand the past of this civilization, the past of this country, so that we feel a certain sense of pride, not in an unspiritual sense, to revitalize it, revive it, and take it even further. Sri Aurobindo is not saying that you become regressive. He is not saying that you look into the past and go station yourself in the past. What he is saying is that you move into the past, recover the treasures, and move forward. He is not a traditionalist in the sense. In fact, if you look at the binary of tradition and modernity, he is transcending this binary also. What he is asking us is to get into the tradition, recover the things from the past, and address the modern situation from that light. That is the idea. In psychological parlance, when we do therapy, we sometimes have the clients regress to progress. What is true psychologically is true sociologically as well. This battered civilization needs to go into the past, recover itself in order to progress. If it does not do that, it will always carry the shadow of the past. And that shadow of the past is not pretty. We know that from the experience. India is a very volatile country as well, politically. In my understanding, this remains so because we have not really compassionately examined the wounds that this civilization has encountered in the past. If the civilizational wounds are looked into, if they are tended, this civilization will come to peace. And this needs to be done in a compassionate manner. Not with a certain belligerence. That is not what is required. That is not what is expected. Also, in my understanding, for the recovery of knowledge, it is extremely important to revitalize the languages of this country, Sanskrit and the vernaculars. In my understanding, every student should learn at least 3 languages: mother tongue, Sanskrit, and English. Most of the knowledge is there in vernaculars and Sanskrit. And if we do not become conversant with them, then we won't be able to understand what India actually has been. And that is critically important because the misrepresentation of India continues. It happens for 2 reasons. One is because of the remnants of colonization that it experienced, and the other is also because of ignorance. When we look at data, we can only evaluate data from a particular standpoint, from a particular perspective. Every civilization has a cosmology, has a worldview, has a paradigm. That paradigm is transferred to us in our mother's milk. It's a very unconscious process. You live in a civilization, in a particular culture for a very long period of time. You will learn the ethos of that particular civilization even without your knowing it. That is something which is extremely normal and natural. Every civilization can look at another civilization only from the perspective that it has experienced its fullness in. Now let's say, for instance, the Western civilization. The Western civilization, and I'm not offering a criticism. If you would think that I'm offering a criticism, my impulse in doing this will get massively misrepresented. This is a critique, this is an understanding. This comes from the study of both the Indian civilization as well as the Western civilization. The Western civilization has not transcended mind. It has not gone past mind. In fact, the one opportunity that it had to transcend the mind was lost when it crucified Jesus. It is only mystics who go past mind. Anyone who has not gone past mind remains within the confines or the framework or the paradigm of mind. The civilization and its population will look at things from the perspective of mind. Now that is the reason mysticism in Euro-American world either has been persecuted or it has been marginalized. It has not been part of the civilization in a central way. On the contrary, this civilization for millennia altogether has taken insights from the rishis, from the mystics. Mystics gain this knowledge after transcending the mind. And despite differentials in their enunciations, there are certain commonalities, some crucial commonalities amongst traditions. Let me give you an example, Buddhism and Vedanta. They may differ in terms of ultimate truths of existence, but you will be able to find many different commonalities. Transcendence of mind is one. Transcendence of binaries is another one. The planes of existence is another commonality. There is a common core which is there in all these traditions. Now, until and unless for the revival of India, we understand the core on which this civilization has been built, we will not be able to get to the very essence of the civilization. We won't be able to explain the civilization either to others or to ourselves. And this is the problem that we are facing in academia today. The yogic knowledge does not even have the legitimacy. Why is that? Our minds, in my understanding, is still very colonized. When we look at knowledge coming from the West. That is predominantly what is taught in the universities today. So every system of thought which becomes dominant in the West becomes the framework or the prism for the evaluation of the Indian knowledge system. Now tell me, can this approach really do justice to this civilization? It does not even do justice interpersonally. If I begin to say that I am going to interact with you and I am going to understand you through the understanding that I have of life, I will never be able to understand you. I will be constantly misrepresenting you. And you will be constantly protesting. So what I mean to say is that what is not possible or feasible interpersonally, it can never become feasible intercivilizationally. And what is happening in India at this point in time? We have internalized the discourse which has come from the West. And we try to understand India. We don't understand India. We misrepresent India in a very, very big way, in a very, very profound way. And what are these universities doing? They are unleashing chaos in this country. There's a political chaos. Of course, when you're here in Pondicherry, everything looks wonderful. It's a beautiful place because of the presence of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. Step out of this country. Every day you will hear about some chaos or the other. Whether it is reservations or women issues or whatever. Is there any attempt being made to bring harmony and peace? And my understanding is that we will not be able to achieve our full potential till we sound the depths of this civilization and understand its own problems through its core principles. That will require power of thought. That is a yoga of a very different kind. What is required, in my understanding, and again I am saying this from the perspective of academia, we will need to master not only the Indian system of thought, but also the Western system of thought. And then we need to do a cross-cosmological comparison. It's a fun exercise. It helps you to evolve. It helps you to enlarge yourself. It truly helps you to become a cosmocentric being. Because you will be able to see the beauty and the limitations of the Euro-American consciousness from an Indian perspective. And you will be able to do the same from the other prism. You are able to get into within of both these cosmologies. It's a fun exercise. In that case, you will be able to embrace both within your being, India and the West. And when I say that, I'm not saying that these two are singular entities. There's a tremendous diversity in both these categories. But it is a yoga. And it has to be done in the right spirit. Not by making thought and mind the end-all and the be-all of this enterprise. But understanding that when the divine force wants to use your mind for transformation, for bringing any kind of transformation in the world, all the work that you have done in the past will become extremely helpful and useful. The mother will activate something in you and you will start rolling. So I'll come back to the recovery again. The recovery of what has been suppressed, what is continually being suppressed, what is still extant in Sanskrit and vernacular languages. Sri Aurobindo says that very little of what was in existence in the ancient time remains, and a very little of that has actually been translated. So there is still a lot of work which needs to be done. And this yoga that we do, that needs to become part of the university system. That is what is required for the transformation, in my understanding. And it is completely in consonance with what Sri Aurobindo has enunciated. And of course, when we begin to connect with the divine, new philosophy, new vision will begin to unfold, will begin to flow through us as different systems of thought flowed through Sri Aurobindo. I'm sure you will be familiar with this, that even when he talks about synthesis of yoga or integral yoga, what he is saying is that if he would have taken all the systems of yoga of the past and brought them together, it would have become a potpourri. It would have become a mixture. So what he did, he took some central principles of different yogas and brought them together. And in chemical terms, I would say he created a new compound. I cannot really leave my chemistry training behind, right? And then, when this spirit, this knowledge is recovered, we need to see the present problems from that light. And I think at that point in time, our intervention will become extremely powerful, extremely puissant. And that is what is required. But we need to understand the forces that are opposing this revival and this renaissance. And at this point in time, those forces actually reside within us. They reside deep within our own existence. We have to deconstruct them. We have to get past them. Then only we will be able to bring Renaissance in India. So let me read a few lines from Sri Aurobindo, and with that I will close. Maybe it would be a good opportunity for us to dialogue and discourse. In fact, that is the Indian way. If you would look at our ancient texts, they are all dialogical. The work of the Renaissance in India must be to make this spirit, this higher view of life, this sense of deeper potentiality, once more a creative, perhaps a dominant power in the world. I'll repeat this sentence. The work of the Renaissance in India must be to make this spirit, this higher view of life, this sense of deeper potentiality, once more a creative, perhaps a dominant power in the world. But to that truth of itself, it is as yet only vaguely awake. The mass of Indian action is still at the moment proceeding under the impress of the European motive and method. And because there is a spirit within us to which they are foreign, the action is poor in will, feeble in form, and ineffective in results. For it does not come from the roots of our being. Only in a few directions is there some clear light of self-knowledge. It is when a greater light prevails and becomes general that we shall be able to speak, not only in prospect, but in fact, of the Renaissance in India. As a closing statement, I would also say that I have read certain articles emanating from Pondicherry, that as Sri Aurobindo's yoga progressed further, he disconnected himself from India and Hinduism. This is incorrect. When we look at thoughts of Sri Aurobindo, we cannot operate in binaries. It cannot be binaries of past and present, tradition and modernity. Sri Aurobindo is simultaneously in both those categories. When Sri Aurobindo's writings become universal and cosmocentric, it is not that he has abandoned the India-centric writings. They all are placed on a spectrum, on a widening spectrum, or widening concentric circles, if you will. They all are part of the same conglomerate. I would say that when we embrace Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, we need to embrace Sri Aurobindo and the Mother in totality, in completeness. I cannot say that, that I'm just going to focus on Renaissance in India and foundations of Indian culture and not read the human cycle. I don't think I'll be doing service to myself as a disciple of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. When we become their disciples, we need to embrace everything that they have written and stated. With those words, I thank you once again for this wonderful opportunity to have me here. Just before coming here, I was at the Samadhi, and as I was stepping out, I saw the announcement of today's presentation on the notice board of the ashram. Nothing will ever beat that. Thank you very much.